On August 5th, an article titled "Just Lower the Difficulty, You Fragile, Ridiculous People" by John Walker for Kotaku caught my attention on my phone's newsfeed. In the article, John is essentially reacting in disbelief to a Steam post by the developers of the first Berserker Kazan's findings after they released their Soulslike game with difficulty modes. Whether or not there should be difficulty modes in Soulslikes is not a new discussion, but the Kazan developers' findings provide us with something of an update. To catch us up, for years, every time From Software is imminently going to release a third-person action RPG Souls-type game, difficulty mode selection has entered the discourse. The conversation has always had two sides. One side believes that making the games more accessible to more players via difficulty mode selection would enable more players to experience the games, and that this would be a good thing. The other side believes that the developers have a vision for the gameplay and difficulty level which is their right to establish with a single mode if they choose. I think this side of the discourse also believes that going this route is sort of an at-your-own-risk option for developers, where if they get it wrong, it may not be good for reviews or sales figures, so tuning and testing is everything if going down this path. Of course, some people have pointed out that From Software seems to prefer an alternative to difficulty modes in the form of providing very powerful tools to the player that can substantially change the experience of an encounter, those being player and NPC summons, and in the case of Elden Ring, Spirit Ashes. So while From Software does that sort of form of difficulty implementation, recently some Souls-likes by other developers have instead actually gone ahead and tried out the full mode selection route. The Lies of P Overture DLC released simultaneously with a patch for the whole game that includes difficulty mode selection for the entire game, and the first Berserker Kazan launched with an easy mode. So the Steam post by the developers of the first Berserker Kazan went up, titled Dev Note, the background behind the difficulty rework and the June update, and it revealed some very fascinating tidbits of player behavior. As it turns out, the player base was statistically far more likely to start out playing the game on normal mode and then drop the game altogether after coming up against a challenge they found insurmountable, rather than lower the difficulty to easy, or in other words, giving up was more appealing than changing modes. The developers then went on to say that they updated the names of the modes so that easy became normal and normal became challenge. 2 more modes, beginner and hardcore, were added to either end of the scale. It begs the question why players were so reluctant to lower the difficulty in the original case. The developers say they asked the player base for an explanation, and they quote, presumably paraphrased an aggregate, "I'd rather quit with dignity than drop it down to easy." And if you ask me, dignity is the standout word in this sentence. I want to go back to another article about Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, which came out shortly after the release window of the game in 2019. It's titled, "I Beat Sekiro's Final Boss with Cheats and I Feel Fine," by James Davenport for PC Gamer, and in the article he describes playing all the way up to the game's final boss unaltered, but after not enjoying the essentially 4-phase fight, he chooses to use a mod to slow down the game speed, originally with the intention to use it as a practice or learning method and then finish at normal speed, but evidently decided to just lock in the kill during slowdown. The writer posits that nothing of the experience was lost, that they still experienced accomplishment, and that they loved the game. Far be it from me to dictate to someone else what their experience was. If he feels accomplished, I take him at his word. The internet, however, didn't, and in response to PC Gamer's tweet of the article, a famous copypasta was born. You've probably heard it if you're as online as I am, but I'll read it out in full. "You cheated not only the game, but yourself. You didn't grow, you didn't improve, you took a shortcut and gained nothing. You experienced a hollow victory. Nothing was risked and nothing was gained. It's sad that you don't know the difference." And I think that quote itself reveals the same root mentality that led players of the first Berserker Kazan to quit instead of lower the difficulty in their own playthroughs. In the Sekiro case, the difficulty selection was external modification and not officially provided, but you can see how badly choosing to lower the difficulty instead of engage it as the developer designed it rubbed the community the wrong way. James says in the article that he's fine with his choice, and what happened in a single-player game should concern only him in the game. Had it not been his job as a journalist to have something to write about, and in this case choosing to write about his own experiences, nobody would have ever had to know, nobody could have ever told him their feelings about how he played the game, and he'd have been able to silently move on to the next. I think we can conclude that a large portion of the audience for these games is incredibly resistant to the idea of easy modes, feeling that it goes against the spirit of the genre. That's why you see Steam discussion threads after Lies of P added its difficulty modes criticizing the decision, although I've got to say, claiming to have purchased and refunded the game on Xbox while posting on the Steam forums definitely leaves me questioning their authenticity. I feel that this is happening because difficulty is social. For me, gaming itself is significantly a social hobby. I've got about 13,000 hours in Final Fantasy XIV and regularly take on Savage and have completed all of its ultimate raids, which intersects challenging gameplay with social play. Within the social environment of Final Fantasy XIV, how you engage with the content difficulty scale can even put you into different social cliques, whether that's casual, raider, opti-raider, world racer, and some version of these social cliques exist inside other MMOs as well. Like in RuneScape, maybe a skiller, maybe kind of a casual PVM, maybe high-end PVM, Iron Man challenge modes, PvP or PK or whatever. WoW runs the gamut as well. Elden Ring Night Rain recently released, bringing the Soulslike combat formula to a multiplayer roguelike experience where admittedly I'm starting to really chafe against working with match-made teammates, but I highly enjoy the game when queuing with pre-mades. And even single-player experiences like Sekiro, which I recently finished myself, is still partially a social experience for me. I streamed it. I have now uploaded a completely broken collection of stream VODs to this channel recently, and I'm still eager to discuss my experience lately with anyone who will listen. I know I'm not alone in that desire to discuss either, for although FromSoft's Souls games have a limited multiplayer with threadbare in-game communication, it's undeniable that there is a Souls community. Discords, subreddits, social media posts, etc. And it's this community where the pushback on difficulty is coming from. Communities have values, and in places where everybody shares their values, members don't have to explain themselves to engage with one another. So it seems that the Souls community thinks a single standard difficulty so that everyone overcomes the same challenges is part of its values. Of course, Elden Ring sold 30 million copies, almost as much as the Dark Souls trilogy combined, so this community got a lot larger in a very short amount of time, and in order to uphold their values and try to implore new community members to share their values, the community engages in gatekeeping. As we've come to see after the release of Elden Ring, did you use ashes has become the gatekeeper's favorite question, but at the same time, a kill's a kill has become the de facto response. And I think this dynamic is why From Software's approach of not having difficulty options, but instead offering a wide array of tools of varying degrees of power is more appealing. Players who say, I beat Malenia, are all talking about the same boss, with the same amount of HP, same damage output, and threatening moveset. No need to distinguish hard mode Malenia, easy mode Malenia. The statement is non-specific, and the waters are muddied by analysis of what the player's kit was. Lines between things like use of summons, a magic build, a melee build, or straight-up challenge running are blurred enough to make the gatekeeping efforts weakened and use of tools defensible. Again, a kill's a kill. Nobody has to feel any kind of hit to their ego when they go to the menu and select easy. Instead, everybody gets to use the same three words, I beat Malenia. No necessity of admitting a difficulty mode. Sekiro, then, is the FromSoft Souls-adjacent biggest offender to date, having no summons, no RPG mechanics or builds, and relatively little in the way of skill tree type customization. For the most part, players have to engage this game on their own terms, so it's no wonder that it attracted so much attention in the difficulty modes discourse. I think part of the issue is that these games are more than just their combat. I think, for example, the Rhythm Heaven series can get pretty brutally difficult in the game's later stages, actually, but I haven't seen anyone say that rhythm games shouldn't test for timing. Of course, many rhythm games run the gamut of difficulty from low to high, and I found online that even some of the more highly customizable ones like Stepmania may have alternate timing windows called judgments that determine what the player's timing targets will be. Yet, when Sekiro tests fairly strictly for timing, people feel it shouldn't be so strict. I think ultimately this comes down to people wanting to see the world and experience the art direction, discover the lore and story without having to pass Genichiro's timing test first, and the same goes broadly for Souls games overall. At the same time, I think Sekiro is very tightly tuned because FromSoft knows we'll be playing as Wolf and what Wolf can do. And while Elden Ring bosses are built in a way where they're not assuming that you're carrying a shield, or they make no assumptions about whether you're a strength, dexterity, or intelligence build, they're meant to be defeated potentially by multiple different methods. In a way, the necessity that the devs do not test so strictly for what the player can do to keep a wide array of builds viable is probably also what keeps the door open for things like level 1 runs as well. So in a way, the accessibility feature of build diversity and stuff actually, I think, is somewhat enabling towards challenge runs at the same time. In other words, doing something for the casual part of the audience actually does something for the hardcore part of the audience as well. I guess the last thing I want to say then is I'm sympathetic to wanting to see these worlds without getting stuck halfway, but I also understand why some people feel like developers should be able to pursue a single standard difficulty mode if that's their vision for the game, and I understand why the social environment around these games and communities favors that as well. Like I said, I think difficulty is sort of inherently social. I think things like summons and the like have been a fairly happy middle ground, but I'm interested to see what the long-term outcome of things like Kazan and Lies of P's difficulty modes will be, and if communities will come around to them or continue rejecting them. That's really it. If you've got anything else you want to say about it, I know this is a very old and tired topic. Generally, I'm not a big fan of being too much of a hard ass on either side about it. That's kind of why, as you can see, I fall maybe somewhere in between on this subject. But if you got any thoughts, or if there's anything I kind of haven't considered or whatever, please feel free to leave it in the comments, and I'll definitely read it. Thank you.